Wang, Liangzhou. Wine from grapes in cups white as the moon. As soon as we drink, the lute summons us to attack. If I end up drunk on some sandy battlefield, don't laugh. Since ancient times gone to war, how many have come back? So we continue with heptasyllabic quatrains, and this is the only piece in the anthology by poet Wang. We also don't know much about him from the queries I've made. The only really sure things that we know about him is that he lived in the 8th century, that he probably passed the examinations, and that he was from some or other area of China. So no biographical information about him, really. About this poem, the title Liangzhou refers to one of China's traditional provinces, at least during the Tang Dynasty. Liangzhou, which more or less overlaps with modern-day Gansu, was located in the northwest of the empire. In fact, it was part of a narrow land corridor that connected what had traditionally been the heartland of China proper with Central Asia, with the territories that under some successful imperial dynasties like the Han or the Tang were subjected to the yoke of Chinese imperial rule. So Liangzhou was, although it was a Sinicized area, it included some barbarian groups, and it was a very thin territory. It had the barbarians very close by, so it was, in a way, the frontier. So any poem titling itself Liangzhou is probably going to be, evidently, about life in the frontier and the wars in the frontier. So a frontier poem in the type, in the style of the other frontier poems we've encountered many times in this anthology. Just as a refresher, remember that frontier poems are generally put in the voice of a soldier. Generally, they voice the laments of soldiers who complain about being far from home, about the hardships, the cold, the dangers of dying, and who are always sighing for their families, their wives left back at home. Sometimes the perspective of the wife is also emphasized in these poems, and they generally have this anti-militaristic, anti-warlike tone. Because that's so conventional in the genre, it would be difficult to try to make an interpretation of this poem as a veiled criticism of the military campaigns under Emperor Xuanzong. Although I imagine such arguments have been made for some of the frontier poems that were written during the High Tang period. So anyway, these poems will include, therefore, life at the frontier, probably the exotic landscape or products in the frontier, and that is exactly the case we encounter in this poem. So let's take a look at it. First couplet. Wine from grapes, in cups, white as the moon. As soon as we drink, the lute summons us to attack. So the first couplet does not exactly dwell a lot on the traditional aspects of life on the frontier, but it does focus on objects being consumed at the frontier by a soldier in intervals of fighting. So the first is wine from grapes. Now, I think I've already commented this before. This seems an obvious association with us, but it was a relative innovation, I think, in the Tang Dynasty. Wine, as traditionally consumed in China, the liquid that is called qiu, is generally made from fermented and or distilled grains, I think. It's more like a beer, perhaps, in its origins, if not in its texture or aspect. Rice wine and millet wine are the traditional spirits of China. So during the Tang Dynasty, grape wine, that's what we Westerners would call wine, made its appearance in China coming from the West. And it was considered an exotic product, which was generally not cultivated except in remote areas of China, like Liangzhou, I imagine. So first barbarian or exotic element of this region, there's this grape wine. And it's drunk in cups, white as the moon. Now, this white as the moon, translated by Geoffrey Waters, seems to connect to our original, which says something like translucent glasses, translucent cups. And this is also a regional product from the jade or jade-like materials that are found in the northwest of China, in Central Asia. These are pieces of minerals, the materials that have this very dark green color, and when you polish them very finely, they become almost translucent. So the light filters apparently in a very seductive, in a very alluring way through the darkened exterior. So in this, so the first line of the poem, instead of telling us about frontier, about soldiers, about armor, about anything, just presents two goods from the frontier which are connected. A translucent cup made from local materials, filled with grape wine, which is this exotic new drink coming from the frontiers. What's happening with these two drinks? Well, the second line tells us the soldiers are drinking it. But they're pretty busy as well, so the poem implies, because as soon as they've drunk some of this wine, they are summoned to attack. Life in the frontier is not just drinking wine and having your ease, it's also fighting. Interesting, the third barbarian object is presented. The lute summons them to attack. So the lute here is not the chin, which we've encountered in many of the poems, it's the pipa, which is more like the medieval, what's it called, the lute, in the purely medieval sense. You know, this instrument that is very, very, very concave and has a long bridge, and that is typically associated with medieval music. Now, this instrument was pretty popular in China, but it was perceived, at least during the Tang Dynasty, to be a foreign instrument, whereas the qin was perceived as the quintessentially national Chinese instrument. The pipa had come from Central Asia, probably during the Han, if not later, and in the Tang Dynasty it was a very popular one, but it still had this exoticity associated with it. So we're drinking wine in strange foreign wine, in strange foreign cups, and we're being summoned to war with a strange foreign instrument. Okay, so the first couplet is the more objective or descriptive couplet in the style of the Zhongwu or description of object type of poems. The second part, as usually happens in a quatrain, is more subjective. It gives us a greater connection with the feelings of the poetic persona of this poem, which seems to be a soldier stationed at the frontier. And he says, "If I end up drunk on some sandy battlefield, don't laugh. Since ancient times gone to war, how many have come back?" So the poetic persona of the soldier has told us that, I've been drinking wine and I've been summoned now to war. And he says, well, one possibility, because we've been drinking wine and now we have to go battling again, is that, I might be drunk and I might just fall from my horse on the sandy deserts of this northwestern area. The northwestern frontier had many deserts, especially around the area of Kokonor and the Gobi Desert and areas like that. So it's a sandy landscape, which again strikes another note on the exoticity of the place where we're in. Not just exotic objects, but an exotic sandy landscape. But the poetic persona of the soldier seems to be excusing himself from the possibility of, because of the drinking, of his falling drunk in the sand. And this is an obviously ridiculous or comical image, like the soldier who's too drunk to fight. But he asks us to pardon the possibility even if it happens. And he gives, in the last line, a melancholy, sad reason. He says, since ancient times, how many have come back? Drinking alcohol and, falling into the sand drunk might seem like funny or ridiculous aspects, but they are part of the life of the frontier. They're part of the life of soldiers. He is hinting that wine and these other exotic products that are consumed are only a partial consolation for the soldiers who have to risk their lives far away from their lands and whose bones may end up bleaching in the cold and heat of Central Asia's deserts. How many who have gone have died? So there's an element there of apology, self-apology for drinking, and also a carpe diem type of philosophy. You would say, like, enjoy as much as you can, because the life in the frontier of a soldier is dangerous. A lot of the times it's nasty, brutish, and short, and can end up with one's bones located in a faraway place from home, unmourned and unburied. So, pretty typical of a frontier-style poem. I think it fits the bill pretty much, and I think it does transmit the main idea pretty effectively.